to do that onto the cloud. Beautiful. So we should be recording now. Great. So it's my absolute pleasure to invite Mr. Stewart Pearce. Sorry, I'm just looking for his book so I can hold it up. For his latest book, I should say, which is a beautiful book called Diana, the Voice of Change. So I'm so delighted to have Stewart here, and I'm just fiddling around so that we can see him. Stewart, feel free to unmute yourself and come through. Stewart is probably, well, not probably, Stewart is definitely one of the world's leading voice coaches, experts on voice, and he's probably most well known for having worked with Diana, the Princess of Wales. And specifically, if I'm right, Stewart, specifically at that time of transition after her separation, and you talk about that transformation in the book. So maybe if I could just ask you a really basic question, Stewart, what has voice got to do with presence? What has our voice got to do with how we connect with other people and how impactful we are, if you like, in the world?
It's interesting that you asked this question because we seem to have unremembered the significance of our voices. And we've unremembered that sound is at the core of creation. And so sound, therefore, is at the core of our own creation. So, for example, if we think of the moment that we shot out of our mother's birth canals or were lifted from her belly, the first thing that we did was to go, and we sounded ourselves into the world, that great roar of life. At the beginning of creation, 13.7 billion years ago, it suggested there was a big bang. And if we move into every single culture on our planet, there is a belief that everything is created through sound. So our voices are means, whether it be through speech or song, of being able to express the inner soul of our being to the outside world. Our voices are purely physical means that we use to communicate the way we think and the way we feel. So what's interesting about this unrememberedness that I'm talking about is that we seem to have forgotten this in the face of the noise of our technology and the noise of our consciousness up here, because we've been educated, socialized, and conditioned to do. And most of the time we're not doing what we could be doing because they say so. So we have stress levels that are very high. And as a result of that, we become non-present. As a result, we forget about our bodies, we just live in our heads, and we forget about our voices. And yet, as we go through this great revolution of consciousness right now, which is the arousal of the divine feminine, we see remarkable women like yourself stepping forward and taking management positions. I would like to see much more. But at least you are stepping forward, and each year there are more ladies who are taking positions of power to share the uniqueness of your gifts, of your empathy through your voices. And what's interesting, just to finalize this aspect of your questioning, is that we each have a note. We each have a sound that is at the very core of our beings, that is our signature note or the song of our soul. And yet most of us don't make it because most of us have been educated, socialized, and conditioned to just live in our heads. And so what I mean is that the sound of the Western world really goes like that. A lot of people talk like that. I'm based between London and New York. And I mean, in America, it's even more like this. I'm going to stop doing this and go back to who I am in sound. And as soon as we do this, we communicate the harmony of our beings. We communicate the power of our beings. So if there is an individual who doesn't feel empowerment, as Diana was not feeling powerful, that what sound can do, what their voices can do, is to move them into a sense of harmony and therefore a sense of self-empowerment.
So, she obviously went on, sorry, I'm just closing my phone down. I was waiting for a message from you in my defense. So Diana went from being someone who was not feeling empowered in the world to becoming clearly one of the most powerful women in the world. And you're saying, Stewart, that her voice would have changed, would have had to change in order for her to do that, in order for her to really step into her power, I suppose is the only way to say it.
Well, no, I mean, another way of putting it, yeah, I mean, yes, but another way of putting it is that she watched the Martin Bashir interview and didn't like what she saw, which is, that's not uncommon. Most of us, when we see ourselves on video or when we hear ourselves on recordings, we don't like what we see because we're seeing ourselves on the outside of our beings. And when we were engaged in the recording, we were on the inside of our beings. And so she realized that her voice was submissive, that her voice was tiny and very delicate and subtle, but was, you know, was very much like this. And what she felt was that it wasn't really an illustration of who she was becoming. And
Oh,
so what I did was to show her how she could really feel her voice at the very core of our beings. You see, all successful communication is based on 60% body language, 30% voice tone, and 10% content. We're
wow.
taught that content is all, but actually I hear leading people all over the world saying to me, I know what I want to say, so why can't I say it? Because in formal situations, we close up, we become tense. So we often become one small part of our beings rather than the totality. And that's what Diana felt that she was being at that time. And so we worked on every aspect of her being, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, to help her feel really grounded and strong and powerful in her sovereignty. And so as a result of that, because she was the darling that she was, because she had so much love and compassion and empathy, what we saw happening was this extraordinary radiance emerging from her being, so much so that she became the most photographed woman in recorded history. And of course, on that terrible, terrible day that she died, or through the week that followed, we saw 3.5 billion people weep for the loss of Diana, and therefore the loss of what she represented in the divine feminine, the loss of their own mothers, the loss of their sisters, their lovers, their, you know, their friends, their colleagues. The world wept.
Yeah, because I think we felt such a connection to her. I never met her in person, but I felt connected to her. I felt like I understood her. I just felt emotionally connected to her. I absolutely grieved. I absolutely grieved.
Yeah,
So is that because she was completely authentic in
yeah,
her
totally.
connection and her desire to make a difference in the world and to communicate something? Is that what that is?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that initially she had that certain je ne sais quoi, that whenever she met people, she had an immediate authenticity with them. And it could be the Pope or it could be the pauper at the end of the street begging for money and a street person begging for money. She had an immediate connection. And I believe that this was so is because she cared. She genuinely cared about everybody. She was genuinely curious and interested in other human beings. And if they were in suffering, she wanted to automatically try and help them by loving them. And many of us are not immediate. Many of us are not authentic. Many of us hide behind the mask of our role because the ego is contained within that mask.
So she had that genuine desire to connect with others.
Yeah, pure
And
love,
yeah, pure love, 100%.
pure
And
love.
then when she saw the Martin Bashir interview, um, she saw herself communicating to others in a somewhat demure but less than powerful way. It didn't sit with her how she was representing herself. And I think that probably is something that a lot of women watching this will chime with, because it's difficult. It's difficult, I think, for women, much more difficult for women to come across in an authentic, powerful way, because for generations we've been conditioned to be demure.
Yeah, yeah. This
And
this submissive feature that I was talking about earlier, because you know, being an empath as she was, and not having the um, the convention of an intellectual prowess. She was an intuitive, she was full of intuitive gifts, full of intuitive magic. She always felt that she couldn't engage in the conversation that was the lingua franca out there, which was to do with the articulate intellectual. That was not Diana's scene. And so she felt undernourished, she felt diminished, she felt a low self-esteem. And of course that carried her into all of the physiological or psychological phenomena that we know she was characterized by, which she was extraordinarily open, and I write about very, very fully in the book. The book is really entering into the essence of who Diana was. So much of it we received, but really entering into, yes, but why did she choose that path? And how did she choose to recognize the disempowerment and then move into empowerment through the work that we did? And it wasn't just I, obviously, it was, all the other people that she worked with. I just happened to have this very confidential relationship with her for the last 2 years.
And the thing that really struck me in your book, I mean, I've got to tell you, I love your book. I was sitting up reading it last night. I'll be honest with you, I didn't realize it was going to be so deep. So I actually...
Deep.
It's deep.
Hey, honey, I'm deep.
You are. So I
thought, what's the point of writing another book? I'm not this way anyway, but what's the point of writing another kiss and tell?
Oh, yeah.
That's not my style, really. It's about who was she and what happened?
Yeah.
And why did it happen? So what was her death all about? And why did she die in the way that she died? And why do we think it was a ritual killing? Although I don't go too deep into that. I do give context for the remarkable choices that she made, because I feel, and so do thousands and thousands and thousands, particularly ladies around the world, we still feel that she's with us. That wonderful relationship that you had with her, even though you didn't meet her, you knew her and you felt she knew you. Women all over the world, they don't want to listen to me. They want to tell me what Diana has said to them. It's very extraordinary. And when I started remembering, because Diana said to me, maybe one day this testament that you're helping me with will become a book. But if it does, make sure that the children are married before you publish it, which is why I've waited all these years. And it just so happens that it's in tune with the arousal of the divine feminine, because so many amazing women are finding ways of releasing themselves from oppressive regimes and stepping forward into the process of their own power. And so the book is for the women of the world. It's got nothing to do with me, and it's just this huge gift. Because a lot of people have been very cynical and have said, oh, you're just writing this to make a lot of money. No way. The money that I make, the little money that I make, because you don't make lots of money from writing books. You actually just draw lots of people attention to what subject matter one's writing about. Most of the money that I'm making from the sale of the books is going straight to a cancer charity that would be one of Diana's charities. So it's about empowering people on that level. So what I was going to share with you that I saw in my journals from that time, 1 or 2 people that I'd met through Diana who she touched. And one of the things that we don't know about Diana was that whenever she wasn't engaged in official duties, she would just jump into the car and drive up to a hospital, run into the reception and say, is there anybody I can sit with? And she'd often do this 2 or 3 times a week when she wasn't engaged or she wasn't, on an official project abroad. She would do this. And so 1 or 2 of the people I remembered, because she would go back and see them again, and then I would go with her or whatever. And some of them are still around, and I went and interviewed them, and some of them said, was she an angel? Because when she touched me, I felt this energy go all the way through me. Now, I was listening to the reportage that has been brought about this week as a result of Harry and Meghan's conversation with Oprah, and a number of people were saying that when Harry had touched them, they felt that a bolt of electricity moved through their bodies.
Wow.
So I feel that Diane and Harry have the same love, the same care, the same empathy.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I agree with you. She talked in the book about, you talked about how she was fascinated with this idea of her signature note, how every one of us has a unique signature note, and you helped her obviously discover what her signature note was. So I love the idea of that. And that's really the key, from what I can understand, Stewart, that's really the key to our voice, finding our voice, speaking our authentic selves into the world. How do we do that? How do we find our signature note?
Oh, heaven knows. Well, firstly,
We'll have an idea here.
firstly, we can't make a sound without breath. So we firstly need to become masters or mistresses of our breath. You know, we need to feel the breath working in our bodies. And most of us, even though breath is the source of our life, it is may the force be with you. It's pranayama, chi, reiki, the ruach, the holy wind. We don't know about it. So firstly, we just need to work on feeling the breath working in our bodies. And when the breath becomes really streamlined in our bodies, we begin to realize that if we actually center the sound, I do this because I'm indicating the whole of my spine, which of course is the leading energy conductor I have in my body, that if I bring all of that into a center, if I literally feel as though I'm speaking through here, then, as Rumi says, if words arise from the heart, they enter the heart. If words arise from the tongue alone, they don't pass beyond the ears. Now, I mean, I could go on talking like this, but I think in a moment, you'd either ask me to temper my sound in some way, or you just switch off.
Yeah, wow. When you do that, the difference, honestly, is incredible.
So it's very much like working with a piano. You know, the thing about a piano, if you think of a horizontal keyboard, is that it has a middle. I'm not suggesting that our note is a middle C, but it has a middle. So if I'm working with the right hand and the right hand alone, you get a lot of treble.
Yeah.
I go right down here like this, and I just use the bass. In a moment, you're either going to fall asleep or you're going to be slightly concerned about me.
Yeah.
If I play with both hands, you get a mixture of the treble and the bass together, which means I'm right in the center of my being. If you take the horizontal, make it vertical, put it into your spine, again, the middle is here. So, you know, in all ancient cultures, this was taught because it's a way of being able to harmonize self into the very core of one's being, into what I call the signature note or the optimum pitch, the center of our range. And the features are not just physical, but also metaphysical. You know, it's to do with the way that the heart is revered as being the seat of the soul in all ancient cultures. So, for example, if we look into the word persona, which we use in the word personality, and when we say, I like her because her personality is that, we actually have summed up the entire person. Or, no, I would never trust his personality. We've summed up the whole person. And actually the word persona or personality, persona in Latin means through sound. So we're really talking about their sound. And in ancient cultures, then men and women actually worked on their voices to always express truth, to always express sincerity, to always express the core of their beings, to always express truth. So, you know, for example, in that period of English literature that I became very involved in through my work as helping the reconstruction of Shakespeare's Globe Theatre. And I was the master of voice at Shakespeare's Globe in London for 13 years or something like that. Right at the very core of Shakespeare's work is the belief that sound, again, is at the very core of creation. I mean, there's a wonderful young man in The Merchant of Venice who's probably only 16 or 17, but he says something like, I'll paraphrase slightly. Oh dear, what does he say?
It'll come when you're not even thinking about it.
It's such an amazing quote. I put it into my first book. So if you forgive me, I'll just find it because you'll hear and you'll be totally surprised by the nature of what it says. In 1597, the Lord Mayor of London said, "All speech is decorated silence." Well, that was before the machines, you see. So this young man says, "The man that hath no music in himself, nor is not moved with the concord of sweet sounds, is fit for treasons, stratagems, and spoils. The motions of his spirit are as dull as night, and his affections dark as Erebus. Let no such man be trusted." So in other words, if a young man was going to his sweetheart's father to ask permission to marry the daughter, the would-be father-in-law would listen to the way that he spoke. And if he spoke with harmony and the man felt that his future son-in-law could be trusted, then possibly their troth would be plighted. Otherwise, no. So everybody was measured on the way that they spoke. We know this from our own childhood because we always listened to the status of someone from their voice. And unfortunately, in the 19th century, it became distorted in our societies because the only way that you could get into polite society was by speaking in this way. And it became purely associated with accent. So for example, in this culture, we know that if I sounded like that, that it was a possibility that I would be acceptable in polite society, which today is considered to be anachronistic. So we listen, God bless the Queen, but we listen into her voice and we think, where did that come from?
Yeah. Yeah.
The Queen is a reflection of an enclave in British society to do with the nature of what that very closed social unit is about in terms of being the head of the royal family, which was really based on a sound that was produced in the 1920s and the 1930s. Today, everything is much more buoyant.
So when you listened to Harry and Meghan, did you feel, as a voice expert, did you feel truth coming from them through them?
I thought it was remarkable. I thought the bravery and courage that they showed to be that truthful. Oh, unquestionably, yeah. And in a very trying situation, because obviously they're deeply wounded by the experience, which moved them into the nervous disposition that they moved into. I mean, Meghan said that she was almost moved to suicide. Yeah. And there she was revealing that she's so heavily pregnant.
Yeah.
And Meghan has the sort of body that her pregnancy really shows very quickly, doesn't it? Because she still has a number of months to go. I think the baby's going to be a Leo in August.
Oh, yeah.
But she quickly becomes an evolving mother. And then after the baby is delivered, whereas Kate often doesn't show it when she's pregnant. Kate Middleton, who's now the Duchess of Cambridge. I thought they were wonderful, really, really wonderful. Yes.
I mean, it's so interesting. You should be interviewed as well as these body language experts, Stewart, in terms of truth and voice and congruency. Because, they get these body language experts who go, well, they did this and that showed that. But yeah, I completely agree with you. And, without digressing into all of this too much, I also think, in all honesty, about someone like Piers Morgan, who, now that you've just demonstrated these types of voices, you immediately make me think of him. And his voice is so unpleasant to listen to. It's so shrill, and it's just from the throat. It just feels, now that you describe it, just feels like there's an anger there, a huge anger there.
Yes, I feel that's probably what we've seen this week in his disturbance over Meghan, because it became irrational towards the end. And that, of course, has led to his movement away from the role that he's fulfilled for the last 6 years. The difficulty with our major media reportage is that it's taken a very cynical, hard-nosed approach. I mean, you know, my book has been reviewed here in English newspapers, and one reporter destroyed the book and tried to destroy me, referring to me as Hannibal Lecter. You know, so it had nothing to do with the book. It was just simply, this was the role that modern day news reportage has taken. So they, you know, quite frankly, the news stations would not have me on because I would refuse to destroy someone or denigrate somebody. And most of the people that go on to talk about body language are people that just are so harping in their criticism, and that's not my scene. So I would refuse to do it. But you know, over the years, I have been asked to go on to the BBC or RTE in Dublin, where I was asked, he's the man who can tell the psychological blueprint of somebody just by listening to their voices. And this is when my intuition works really well as well, that often I would listen to voices that I didn't know. And they would be voices that would be in the public eye, particularly in Irish politics or American politics. And then I would give a profile on the person. And often I prove to be quite accurate. So I listen to people's voices. It's something that I've always done, listen to voices.
Yeah. So I think the thing that I'm hearing you say is perhaps connect to the truth of what you want to convey, so that when you are conveying something, it's from the depth of you and it will have a ring of truth to it. So from your heart and not your head.
Yeah, yeah.
And perhaps number two is to breathe and trust that connection from your heart to others.
Well, that comes first, because the only way that we can be true, the only way that we can be relaxed, the only way that we can be sincere, the only way that we can actually come from the center of our beings is if we're breathing. Our breath keeps us alive. I mean, it is the very substance of our life. If I take your breath from you, you will be dead within 10 seconds. But, you know, if I starve you or don't give you water and lock you in a room, you will go on for weeks, sometimes months. But if I take your breath, you'll be dead within 15 seconds. Isn't it interesting that COVID, this awful, awful phenomenon that we seem to have created, is affecting the pneuma of our lungs?
Yeah. Yeah. So we've got to breathe. We've got to connect to the truth, the real deep down truth.
When we breathe, we become relaxed. Do you see? And when we become relaxed, we have weight in our bodies. We have groundedness in our bodies. And when we are grounded, we begin to express from the very core of our beings. And so what other values would we express but our interests, our sincerities, our truths, and what we care about? That's where it actually comes from, you see. And then, of course, what's fascinating is that we're all hardwired for these qualities, these virtues. And so as soon as we have someone of note, with meaning, with significance, expressing in this way, automatically everybody, because we're all human, everybody resonates with that. This is, for example, what the great actor does. So my job as a voice coach in theatre was to allow the noble actor, he or she, to stand, for example, at the Globe in front of 1,600 people and magnetically draw them all into the one experience of what the actor or the two actors or the three actors were experiencing on stage, something I call the magnetic voice. So it's very, very, very powerful. And I believe that many of the voices that have influenced us over the years have that. I mean, Barack Obama, for example. You know, you said at the beginning of the description about me that Diana was possibly my most famous client. I guess so, but you know, I'm the man. My first big client was Margaret Thatcher. That's how old I am. And, you know, and her voice changed from being this sort of upper middle class thing, which she'd learned at Oxford. And what I did was to remind her about the weight of her body, which is the same thing that we've been discussing. Because when we have weight in our voices, when we have gravitas in our voices, we always show authority.
Got it. I love that.
And so Margaret and I would go into the House of Commons after sessions had finished late at night or in the early hours of the morning. Margaret only slept for 4 hours a night, so she quite enjoyed having a bit of a whiskey and then coming down with the Commons, and I would have her bowl her voice across the floor. "Oh no, Mr. Kinnock," rather than, "Oh no, Mr. Kinnock," you know. And she found ways, and she just loved it. I mean, she was such an extraordinary woman. She loved doing this because it allowed her to feel very free and very in her power to impart or express the wonder of what she wanted to do. You know, I have no commentary on her political status. I was just helping her with her voice.
I love that.
And it was at the beginning of her career, I add, rather than at the end, you know.
So this isn't so much about having power. This is about bringing forth our intrinsic power so that we represent ourselves truthfully and authentically in the world, so that we don't feel that we're undermining ourselves or playing small, or we look at ourselves and we, we'll see a clip of ourselves and we go, "Oh, that's not how I want to come across in the world." I love that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, go on. Sorry, go on.
And so we become radiant, you see. I mean, there's so much joy there that we literally, our energy field just becomes this radiant, auric field, which is full of love, full of joy, full of enjoyment, full of truth. Because when we're in our love, when we're in our joy, we're always in our truth, unless we're confidence tricksters.
Yes. So I've got to ask you about one of the most successful orators ever, but who used his influence and power, obviously in a very negative way. And of course, I'm talking about Hitler. Now, to me, he's got a horrible voice. What's your thinking on that, Stewart?
Well, it's interesting. And, we, of course, our voices change, they evolve with our beings. I think it was Samuel Johnson who created the first English dictionary in the 18th century, said that all tongues are like governments prone to dissolution. So evidently our voices change. Elizabeth I always complaining about Sir Walter Raleigh because she could never understand him, because he spoke with a very thick Devon accent. So, we really need to go back into the time of the 1920s, the 1930s. And the point was that that Europe was going through a terrible economic recession. And three young men stepped forward who appeared to be brave beings, were full of imagination from a political point of view. And one of them was Adolf Hitler. It's interesting, so if you ever listen to the German sound is quite cerebral, so Deutsch ausgezeichnet. Yeah, wie geht's? It's very much here like this. It's rare that you find the German sound coming from deeper in the body. And of course, this is a sweeping generalization. So, Sieg, Heil, Sieg, Heil, Sieg, you hear it coming. And also it was a sound that he used to mesmerize people because it was an entraining sound for the German people, not for the English people. We rejected it. For the German people, they were evidently working on that field of frequency at that time, mostly as a result of terrible, terrible fear of what was going to take place because the recession had been so diabolical. We know about the Wall Street crash. We know about the Great Recession in the United States, but the same thing was going on after the First World War in Central Europe because the war was so expensive. I mean, expensive in terms of human life, as well as on each country's economy.
Yeah. I grew up in Northern Ireland, and during the Troubles, I made a conscious decision to change the way that I spoke. And I think part of that was a reaction to the violence in the environment. And I felt that the accent and the way people spoke had a violence in it. And it was a way for me to distinguish myself from that. And I'm sure I came across as the most superficial, snobbish person, but I just literally overnight decided I'm just not going to speak like that. So I began to speak in this softer, much more lyrical way. that was as accent free as I could make it in that time. But I'm wondering what you think. Do you think that that sort of very harsh accent, can that reinforce a way of feeling and a way of
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, look at Mr. Trump, for example.
yeah.
And some of his, some of his supporters. It's very cerebral, and what's interesting is because you were not of the vibration that you were hearing. I thought you were from Southern Ireland, you see, because when we're down in Southern Ireland, it's all like that, isn't it?
Exactly.
And there you have this lovely, soft, lilting, disappearing into the Celtic mist. Whereas when we go to Belfast, it's all like that. You know what I'm saying? The
Yeah,
Falls Road.
exactly.
And it is very nasal,
Yeah.
so that level of sensibility, and I've always found it, I have to be careful what I'm about to say so I don't become too political, but I've always found whenever I've worked in Belfast, I've always been dismayed by the level of anger that seems to be in people's bodies. And of course, I'm really compassionate to that as well, because the Troubles were a long time ago. The Troubles were really, really, really challenging. And I was sort of somehow involved because Mo Molam, who pioneered the peace talks, was one of my clients, and I helped her all the way through the latter stages of her time in Northern Ireland as Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. And Mo was just amazing. I mean, one of the most beautiful, one of the most extraordinary human beings that I've ever had the great joy and grace to work with. I mean, there's a wonderful word in Yiddish, which is mensch, a real human being, absolutely amazing human being. And the way that she told those adult boys what she felt about them, when the Sinn Féin came in with Jerry Adams, and there's this, and she would just simply say, "Okay, boys, calm down. Right now, what we're going to do is this. Okay, so behave." And they all did. It was extraordinary.
Yeah. No, I've often thought about accents. Yeah.
So it's, we're dealing with the way that frequency functions within us, that is formulated by our physiology or by our psychology. There is a theory, for example, about the United States accent, that the accent, and I wrote about a long time ago, so forgive me if I don't get the fact absolutely right, but the Northern American accent is much higher than the European English-speaking accent, of just standard accent, standard English, standard American. And the reason being that the hertz cycles per second associated with the electrical currency is much higher in the United States. That was a theory that was put forward by a very eminent acoustician that I met many years ago. So that's quite interesting.
Wow.
When you listen, one of my dearest friends is an agent that I had for many years in the United States, and she's a New Yorker. She's now, Kay's probably about 86 now, and she has a sort of Katharine Hepburn, "Darling, you will meet me at the St. Pierre at 1800 hours. Do not be late. I will be drinking a dry martini. I suppose you'll be drinking water." That sort of accent, as opposed to, "Okay, now my current agent is really, really, okay, Stu, you need to do something about my voice."
Yeah. How funny. How funny. So, last question. I'm going to guess that we have much more impact with people when we can connect to our heart, when we are really expressing that deeper truth rather than reciting facts and imparting information, however accurately, we do that, or professionally we do that. Is that the real key to really connecting deeply with people?
Totally, absolutely. And particularly through the crises that we're all moving through at the moment, and how in the great organizing systems of our cultures in the West, that you will hear the word authenticity, integrity, sustainability, particularly moving through the corporate world, or through the world of politics and banking. These, this has suddenly come up as though we've only just dreamed about authenticity. But it must be because there's an imbalance in relation to the latter, the inauthentic, the insincere, as well as the fact that we're living in extraordinary trying times. And of course, when we're living in trying times, we're taken to the very core of our beings. We're taken right into the very core of our bone marrow, because life can be very harrowing. And then we begin to realize that the heart is the seat of the soul. There is a measurement in the scientific community that the heart has an energy field 5,000 times greater than the human brain.
Oh, wow. And I'm wondering if it's especially important nowadays, because we seem to be living in this time of, let's call it disclosure, where the truth is just forcing its way to the surface. And we're slightly obsessed with getting to the truth of what's really going on. And, does that make sense?
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's this word transparency, isn't it? The organ of transparency, which is the instrument that we're using to shine into what we're seeing as the patriarchy, because we're seeing that this system of governing is something that no longer serves us. And one of the reasons why so is because the people in power have suppressed the real truth, that they looked very impressive in their capacity, but then we're learning that what they were doing backstage is being deliberately treacherous. And so we're living in a time when truth and transparency are the organs of communication. Yeah. There's a wonderful poem which sums this up. And I won't speak the whole poem, but there's a small section which says, "Thank God our time is now, when wrong comes up at every turn, never to leave us, till we take the longest stride of soul we humans ever took. It takes thousands of years to wake, but will you wake for pity's sake?"
I love
So
that.
the voice of compassion, the voice of love, the voice of inclusivity, the voice of empathy is the voice of the future. And this is largely produced by you amazing women. We are learning how we can be gentler, kinder, softer, and less organizing through here, less bullying through here, because men love to jostle. But to really come into the deep aspect of your sharing, because you women really know how to share, really know how to empathize. When I work with women, you go there into the honest degree immediately, and automatically everybody's agreeing with one another. Whereas, it takes me much longer to get the men to do that when I'm working in corporate situations or on retreats or wherever I am in workshop situations. Yeah. So the next chapter of history will be written by the women and the girls, there's no doubt. And that's why I wrote the book,
Exactly.
Diana, the Voice of Change, because the voice, people say to me, well, what is the voice of change? Well, it's very simple. The voice of change is the voice of love. The voice that we have used in the past is the voice of thought. It's the voice of cerebralization. Got to be seen to be intelligent. And now we're recognizing is that we can have all of these facts, but actually, if we're not really living in the transparency and the authenticity, in the full resonance of our being, then something sadly is missing. And
I honestly think you've done the most remarkable justice to Diana's legacy, because I genuinely feel that your book has pulled it all together and really put into perspective what her contribution has been to the world, in all honesty. And it feels like it's more relevant now than ever. And it's just sort of poignant that we're talking in the week that her son, Harry and Meghan, have come out and spoken their truth. So
I've just heard that the book is being published. I have a New York publisher, and it's being published in May on my birthday. I've just heard.
Wow. I'm sure it'll be a massive success.
Amazing. And the book is just the beginning of a project called the Diana Heart Path. So there will be other books about the wisdoms that she shared with me, that she, expressed when I was with her. She was an extraordinary human being. And so the point is, I guess, that in times of great struggle as we are in. We've just been through a year of the most extraordinary phenomenon that has ever globally hit our planet, which of course has led to economic hardships, which has led to the dissolution of social systems, etc., etc. So we're having to rethink and then re-strategize and then recalibrate the whole of our lives. We're developing a new hierarchy of values that are based on truth and beauty and love and consideration and care. I feel that's one of the reasons why Mr. Biden is now in power rather than somebody else like Mr. Trump, And so we're really moving into developing a very new timbre, a very new way of being, which is the language of the heart.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, honestly, your book is so timely and it's so deep. But thank you so much for your time, Stewart. I can't thank you enough. It's been fascinating and fabulous. Thank you so much. Thank you.